Massimo Introviņjes, kurš ir dzimis 1955. gadā, un no daļliteratūras viņš ir guvis interesi par nekristīgām reliģijām. Un ir gājis Turīnas sociālajā institūtā, kur iepazinās ar katoliskās akcijas pārstāvjiem un pievienojās šai kustībai 1972. gadā. Tur arī iepazina savu dzīves biedri, un tagad viņiem ģimenē ir 4 bērni. Tad arī viņš apmeklēja kā lais Almo Collegio Capranica kolēģiņu, un tur satikās ar daudziem ievērojumiem cilvēkiem, arī ar Rino Fisichella, kas ir tagad arkibīskaps un arī vada jaunās evangelizācijas pontifikālo padomu. Viņš bija arī pie mums šeit starptautiskā konferencē 2004. gadā. Un viņš arī ir sarakstījis ļoti daudz grāmatu, vairāk kā 60 grāmatu, un vairākus 100 zinātnisku rakstu. Viņa pētnieciskās intereses ietver filozofiju, tiesību socioloģiju, politiku, reliģijas un jaunās reliģiskās kustības, sabiedrības un reliģijas attiecības, fundamentālisma attīstību islamā. Jo sevišķi viņa vārds ir saistīts ar 1988. gadā dibināto jauno reliģiju pētniecības centru, kas ir tagad Eiropā lielākā institūcija reliģiju pētniecībā. Un arī izdod daudz literatūras par reliģiju, par ezotērismu, gnosticismu un citām parareliģiskām parādībām. Profesors ir arī rakstījis un interesējies par populāro kultūru, par masu kultūras fenomēniem, ir darbojies Itālijas Kristīgo demokrātu savienībā, no kuras gan vēlāk ir izstājies, jo bijis neapmierināts ar to ievirzi, kāda tur ir bijusi politikā. Un ir arī asi kritizējis sekulāro humanismu. Un līdz ar to viņa uzstāšanās arī saistīta ar šīm interesēm. Proti viņa uzstāšanās temats ir ticības gads un sekulārais laikmets. We are very pleased to have you here, Professor.
Thank you very much. The bad news is I don't speak Latvian. But some years ago I taught a course in the University of Riga, and many students at one stage wanted a lesson in Italian, saying they were studying Italian. And but I'm told it's better to speak in English, so I will speak in English. So first of all, I want to thank the organizers and His Excellency for the invitation. It's not my first time in Riga, and it's a city I like very much. It has a lot in common architecturally with my own city, Torino, in Italy, and I particularly like the architectures of Michael Eisenstein, the nice buildings, which in a way were to me a good reaction to the idea that buildings should be purely functional. Buildings should also be beautiful, of course, and we can or we cannot like the style of Art Deco or Liberty, but it reminds me very much of my own town. So my topic today will be the year of faith and the secular age. Secular age is the title of a big book. It's 800 pages by Charles Taylor. I will quote in the last part of my speech. And I think if we want to talk about the year of faith, we can use as a starting point the apostolic letter for the benediction of the year of faith, Porta Fidei, of Benedict XVI, which starts from something appealing to me as a sociologist. The Pope Emeritus said, whereas in the past it was possible to recognize a unitary cultural matrix broadly accepted in its appeal to the content of the faith and the values inspired by it, today this no longer seems to be the case in layered areas of society because of profound crisis of faith that has affected many people. And later on, in the same apostolic letter, Porta Fidei, Benedict XVI quoted Lumen Gentium from Vatican II to the effect that the crisis of faith, which was already apparent 50 years ago, at the time of Vatican II, is a crisis coming from both outside of the Church and from inside of the Church. And the final result is what Benedict XVI called a society without faith. Now, what I would like to discuss with you today, from my position, I know I am with many distinguished theologians today, but I'm a social scientist, a sociologist. From my point of view of a sociologist, what may be the meaning of this expression, a society without faith? And I will discuss this notion, society without faith, by commenting on two recent social studies. One was done by the University of Chicago in 2012 and has been commented widely in international media. It's called Beliefs About God Across Time and Countries. And the other is a research I did in Sicily. Sicily, as you know, is an island in the south of Italy. It's the largest region of Italy. And I did a research on unbelief and atheism in Sicily with some colleagues, which was widely reviewed and commented in the Italian media. So let's start first from this study published by the NORC, the National Opinion Research Center of University of Chicago in April 2012, Beliefs About God Across Time and Countries. Now, in the last 20-30 years, English-speaking sociologists have written a lot about the 3 Bs. I believe the first one to use the expression 3 Bs was a British sociologist I know quite well, believing Christian, Church of England, Grace Davy. And the 3 Bs are believing, belonging, and behaving. And the original idea of Grace Davy was to look more deeply into the quite controversial idea of secularization. Because secularization of what? And sociologists of religion, when they talk about religion, are really talking about 3 different phenomena. The 3 Bs, believing, belonging, behaving. And to make a long history short, there is a widespread agreement now, but there is not a lot of secularization in believing. People, even in the West, still say they believe. Perhaps they do not exactly believe in the Christian God, but the number of atheists in most countries is not growing. They say they believe in the sacred, in an afterlife, in something more than what we can touch. It's also more or less agreed among sociologists that there is a prevailing secularization of behaving, the term B. People behave in their moral life, in their political options, in their cultural choices, not taking into account religion alone. And so there is a limited secularization of believing, there is a high secularization in behaving. And all the controversy we wrote and we keep writing so many books about is around the second B, belonging. Because about belonging, there are a lot of debates. How many people go to church? How many people don't go to church? And there are a lot of methodological issues, because many investigations are done with the CATI, the computer-assisted telephone interviews method. So when you read in the media that 30% of the Italians go to Mass, these are people who answer a phone call. Did you go to Mass last week? And it may be different, the answers to phone calls and the reality. And I did a research in an area where phone calls 30%, did you go to Mass last week? But in this limited but representative area, we counted all the Masses, even the very small, the neo-catechumene, the hospital, we counted all the Masses, and the real number was 18.5%. I know today you have some Polish colleagues, the Polish Bishops' Conference should be commended because every year they do a study. They both have the telephone interviews and they count people actually going to Mass. And they have the same phenomenon. Many more say they went with respect to those who really went to Mass. And we have an excellent series. The Polish bishops have been doing this study for 30 years. And I always cautioned that those who say they went to Mass and didn't go are not simply liars. It's not a moral judgment. And the fact that they say they went to Mass is important. It's a way of identifying themselves with the Catholic Church. So it's a community. In Poland, the bishops distinguish between declarantes and dominicantes. Declarantes are those who declare they went to Mass, and dominicantes, those who really went to Mass. But even the declaring are people who want to identify with the Church. Perhaps they would like to go to Mass, and then for whatever reason they didn't go. But yet, this is just an example of how there are strong debates about how many practicing Catholics or Christians really are. Now, back to the Chicago study. It's a study of the West, and then their notion of the West includes Japan, which I would not have included because measuring religion in Japan is very tough. Most Japanese say they are not religious because they understand the religion as the Western idea of religion, but then in another sense they have a lot of beliefs in the sacred. Now, what the Chicago team wanted to study was the first believing. And the core of this work was everybody's studying belonging, and nobody studies believing, so let's focus on believing and see how many people believe in God or a higher power, because it's taken for granted that most people believe in a higher power, but is this really true? I will skip some methodological problem in the Chicago research. I gave a written text you can perhaps read, but it will become too long. Now, the results of the Chicago research was really a compilation of previous researches in the last 25 years, is that there is in the West a decline in the belief in God, but it's a comparatively small decline. It's not dramatic. Second conclusion is that there are very large variation between one country and the other. And third conclusion is that there are very important demographic variations, meaning when people become old, and I'm not talking only of people who lived in a different era, even people of today, predictably when they become old, they will become more religious. And the middle class is the segment where people are normally less religious, and for the young there are important variations. For instance, Italy is one of the few countries where the majority of those between 18 and 28, 50.7%, say they have a personal relation with God. And Italy is almost the double of Latvia. Latvia in the Chicago studies, 26.5% of young people between 18 and 28 say they have a personal relation with God. What about atheists? The Chicago study distinguished between two categories of atheists, which is now quite common. The strong atheists are those who really oppose religion and say, yes, I have decided that there is no God, and I'm very persuaded I'm an atheist. And the weak atheists say, I don't care. I have a lot of things to do, or it's not a problem I'm interested in. Perhaps there is something, but I don't really care. So sometimes they were called agnostics, and now most social scientists would say weak or feeble atheists. Now, in Italy, according to the Chicago study, strong atheists will be 1.7%, and they are more or less the same in the last 25 years. They don't go up, they don't go down. While the weak atheists, those who don't care, in 1991 in Italy were 5.9% and now 7.4%. So there is a significant raise, but still they are a minority. In Latvia, according to the Chicago study, the strong atheists are 8.2%, and the weak atheists 18.3%. So these figures are much higher than in Italy, but much lower than in the Czech Republic, which is the most atheist country in the West, according to the Chicago study, and even much lower than in France and in Sweden. Chronologically, the number of atheists is in the race in Latvia, according to the Chicago study, in the last 25 years plus 9.1%, while interestingly enough, there is a minus 11.8% of the atheists in Russia. So in Russia, atheists are actually going down, while in Latvia they are going up. Although they are not going up as spectacularly as in the Czech Republic, plus 18.4%. Even in Poland they are going up, plus 1%, but plus 1% is 25 years is not statistically significant. I don't know if Philippines are really in the West, but in the Chicago study, the country where most people have a strong belief in the personal relation with God is Philippines, 91.9%. Atheists in the Philippines only 0.1%. And if we go down to the scale of regions, not countries, but regions, the region, and that's not surprising, there are many studies, with the highest percentage of atheists is East Germany, formerly DDR, 52.1%, strictly followed by some parts of the Czech Republic. A particularly sad phenomenon for me is how the number of believers went down in Ireland, minus 15.4% in the last 25 years. And I believe that that's mostly due to the pedophile priest crisis in Ireland. And another interesting phenomenon is the growth of religious believers in Israel. Israel is the country where religious believers had the highest growth in 25 years, plus 23%. And quite correctly, the report of Chicago says that's not a phenomenon of conversion, Jews don't convert, but it's a phenomenon of demographic. Religious Jews have 6-7 children, and the secular Jews have only 1 or 2 children. So the demographics will raise the number of the believers, which is something we are seeing in Christian countries too. So what do we do of the Chicago report? I would say that this report says that there is a growth of the atheists, but it's not very important. And the area really growing is not the strong atheists, the ideological atheists, but it's the weak atheists, those who don't care because we don't have time for God and for religion. And this, for me, is a significant phenomenon with pastoral implications. The really growing area is not the area of those who are against religion, the ideological atheist of communist time or extremely radical secularists now, but the area growing is people who simply don't care. They have no time and no interest for religion. Now I will go quickly to the research I did in Sicily for a number of reasons, including, as usual, for sociological investigations, that funds were available in this area. I and some colleagues have published 5 volumes about central Sicily, crisscrossing and studying very in-depth religious minorities and how many go to Mass and answers to different interviews. And in this area, central Sicily, in one of these research, in 2012, we tried to measure three categories: the strong atheists, the ideological atheists, the weak atheists, those who don't care, and those who are far away from religion. Far away from religion, people say we are not atheists, we believe, but we don't go to any religious rite except for funeral, weddings, but not perhaps Christmas, but otherwise we normally don't go. Now again, to make a long story short, in this area, which is normally quite representative of Italy as a whole, strong atheists were 2.4%. These are the ideological atheists. And we saw ideological atheists are more numerous among men than among women, are more numerous among old people than among young people, and are more numerous among people with a low level of education. And there is an explanation for this, that mostly these strong atheists are not persuaded by atheistic propaganda in television. That's folklore. It's not influential at all. But most of these strong atheists are old communists. You know, in Italy we have the largest communist party in the West. And these are 70, 80-year-old communists who are still communists. They were indoctrinated by the party when they were young in the Stalin era, and so they remain very committed to ideological atheism. They are normally not very literate, normally old, and normally men rather than women. But if we go to see the weak atheists, it's the other way around. It's 5%, so it's more than the double. Are people who say they are atheists because they could care less about religion. And in this case, the weak atheists, we have more women than men. We have more people with higher education than without higher education. And we have mostly people under 64 years, so middle age and young people. And these are people who don't care about ideological atheism or Marxism, or again they say they don't even care about some intellectuals who are atheists, but they don't care about religion. They say they have a lot of other things to do and no time to consider whether there is or there is not God. And then we have a larger category, which is the majority of our sample, and it's the people we call far away from the churches or from the church, but even they are not Protestant. And that's 63.4 of the sample, and these people who say they believe there is something, a higher power, a sacred reality, a God, but they never go to church. They only go exceptionally, perhaps once a year, or funeral, weddings. So if we put together strong atheists, 2.4%, weak atheists, 5%, and far away from the churches, 63.4%, we go to close to 70%. And these are people who don't really regard, well, perhaps they regard, but are not really part of any organized religion, which is consistent with the fact that those who say they go to church, not those who really go, those who say they go, who like to go, are roughly 30%. Now, very quickly, since I have 4 minutes now, I will tell you 2 things. Number one, we also asked why exactly you never go to church, or you are not interested, or you are against the church, except the very old people. where it's still surprisingly strong in Sicily, the fact we are Marxist. It's still quite a few old people say we were educated in the Marxist party manual. We still believe in Marx, but these are people in their 70s or 80s. For the other people, the reasons given are basically three reasons. Number one, we don't like the church because of the pedophile priest. That's very interesting because there was not even one pedophile priest in Sicily. So they simply look at the television or reading the books, not even one case in Sicily. Number two, we don't like the church because the church is rich, and that's also campaigns in Italy. They don't pay the taxes, in fact they pay a lot of taxes, but never mind, that's what the television says. And the third reason is we don't have time. There is the problem of the war, the economic crisis, the crisis of the family, so we don't have time to stop and think about God and religion. Now, the second thing I wanted to say is the secular age. That's a famous book of Charles Taylor, Canadian Catholic philosopher, who says there are three secularizations. The secularization of believing, not very strong, of belonging, behaving, very strong, but he also called the secularization number three, something which I think is really happening. So in this case, I think Taylor is right, and he says it's the switch in what is normal. Taylor says in Canada, when I was a young man, it was normal to be a believer. So you have to justify yourself. If when young man you enter into the adult life, you decide not to be a believer, never to go to church, you have to explain because it was normal. And now it's the other way around. Young men entering adult life, the vast majority don't go to church, don't care about religion, don't discuss religion. And so you have to justify and to explain yourself if you go to church. Now, the figures we found in Italy, this 70% of people who don't go to church are weak atheists or strong atheists, and the figures of Chicago, I think support this. What is normal is not to care about religion, is not to care about religion. And so this third secularization, or rather he says secularization number three, is really taking place. Let me conclude by saying that what's the way of fighting this or making people interested in religion. If we look at what forms of religion are successful, Pentecostalism in the Protestant war, charismatic forms, we see that watering down religion is applauded by the secular media, but is not really what interests people. I had prepared a quote from Benedict XVI in the dialogue with the Lutheran bishops in Erfurt, but yesterday we had a much better quote, or much, not better, but it's perhaps more appropriate from Pope Francis. And Pope Francis says it's not very interesting if we become a purely humanitarian organization. We can walk, Pope Francis says, as much as we want. We can build many things, but if we do not profess openly Jesus Christ, things will go wrong. We may become a charitable, non-governmental organization, but we will not be the church, the bride of the Lord. And when we are not walking, we stop moving. And he quoted the French writer Léon Blois, very strong quote. Anyone who does not pray to the Lord prays to the devil. When we do not profess Jesus Christ, we profess the worldliness of the devil, a demonic worldliness. Thank you.